Jennifer Campbell, creator and host of the Systemic Leadership Summit. Welcome to this session. And in this session, we are going to be covering the most embodiment-focused systemic approach we've had so far in our summit. And we'll really be exploring a social art form called social presencing theater, or SPT for short. And this is really designed to make visible the invisible levels of awareness and the patterns of relationships that give rise to our choices. And my guest for today is very experienced in the art of dance and in the embodied approach that we'll discuss today. And her name is Arawana Hayashi. Now, Arawana has pioneering work as a choreographer, a performer, and an educator. And this work is deeply sourced in collaborative improvisation. She currently heads the creation of social presencing theater for the Presencing Institute. So she works together with Otto Scharmer and colleagues at the Presencing Institute, and she brings her background in the arts, meditation, and social justice to creating social presencing that makes visible both current reality and emerging future possibilities. Her dance career ranges from directing an interracial street dance company formed by the Boston Mayor's Office for Cultural Affairs in the aftermath of the 1968 murder of Dr. Martin Luther King, to being one of the foremost performers of Japanese court dance bugaku in the United States. And she's been co-director of the dance program at Naropa University in Boulder, Colorado, a founder, director of two contemporary dance companies in Cambridge, Massachusetts, and she continues to perform in a multidisciplinary performance ensemble originating out of Naropa University and the Alaya Institute, where she currently teaches in leadership programs. So Arawana is a senior teacher in Shambhala, a global network of meditation centers dedicated to applying mindfulness to creating enlightened society. She teaches both meditation and art based on bringing out the basic goodness of individuals, of relationships, and of society. And today she's here to talk about social presencing theater. Thank you so much for being here with us, Arawana. I'm really looking forward to our conversation. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Jennifer, for inviting me. I am also looking forward to thinking together and an unfolding conversation, very much so.
Yeah, and let's start with dance and meditation, because these are really core threads in your career and experience. Could you share with us, as we dive more deeply into the subject, what do dance and meditation mean to you?
It's a wonderful question. I realize that I probably think about everything that people do, whether they're task activities or just ordinary activities, as a kind of dance. And the connection for me is that the sense of both mindfulness and awareness of having a feeling that our cognitive mind and our body are naturally synchronized,
Mm-hmm.
that also human beings have a natural connection and care and knowing of other human beings, so that we form ourselves continuously into what we're calling social bodies. So we have, in systems, we have this amazing body-mind system, each of us, and then we're continuously, of course, in social systems, which we call social bodies in our work, whether that's a family but specifically working in teams and organizations, that these are their own bodies, and they have their own dance, as it were. So I guess it's both a metaphor the word dance, as well as the fact that people move and stop and arrange themselves in different configurations, which is really what um, what dance is also.
Yeah. Wow. Thank you for sharing this. I'm just, as you are explaining it, so and you're making a movement as well with your hands as you're sharing what your views are and experiences are with dance and meditation. Um, it's almost as if it's an like an integrated and innate thing that we humans do to have the interconnection of the more cerebral and the rest of our bodies, and the interconnectedness with others in the social bodies, as you call them, and how that is also a dance, how that's also movement, more from a collective perspective.
That's
So
my sense of it. And also the meditation part really is to be aware of that,
mhm,
that the naturalness and the innate quality of integration, synchronization, connectedness, the basic fabric, a healthy, sane fabric of what it is to be a human with others,
yeah,
that we're aware of that. Because so much of the input that we get is how awful people are, how dreadful things are, how the sort of the real fear-based behaviors that, of course, we're all familiar with. But besides that, there's such a shiny goodness in people and in groups of people, and the meditation helps us notice that more.
yeah. Wow, I love that. The meditation is actually about the awareness.
Yeah,
Um, Many people think of meditation as um, a way of trying to stop your thinking and not think of anything. Um, but actually, it's almost impossible to completely shut down your awareness levels, because there's always this interconnectedness going on,
right.
and we know of it to a certain extent, that we can enhance with the practice of meditation.
As you said, it's always there, awareness. We just forget. So and in this approach that we use at the Presidency Institute, and also
Mhm.
what I'm trained in, it's not using the meditation to fix something that's gone wrong or to
Yeah,
suppress or repress something, but it's more used to really appreciate what it is to be a human with other humans, and sometimes that requires at least a little bit of um, quieting a discursive, um, chattery mind. But that happens naturally by
yeah,
just being still, or by walking in the woods, or by many things. The body and the mind settle down and become friends with one another.
yeah, yeah. And so, um, if I understood you correctly, dance and the arts have been part of your life and almost part of your DNA as a person. Also, from our pre-discussion that we've had before this conversation, and I couldn't help but wonder how you ended up in the context of um, the Presencing Institute or systemic work, even though there are clear parallels. But could you share with us more how you ended up in the unveiling of the patterns of relationship
Mm.
between people? How did you end up moving towards that context?
The word wonder is a good one, Jennifer, because I wonder also how that happened.
Oh,
Um, Not that I don't know, but that it was such an auspiciousness, so much auspiciousness um, and blessing and good fortune, that yes, my whole life has been in dance. I was trained as a child, and I had a little detour off somewhere into library science, but basically, I've been in dance and in making work both in neighborhoods and in the theater for my whole life.
Yeah.
And so, and I was very interested, in the 1970s in improvisation, in co-creating with others. Not always in dance, but they could have been multidisciplinary. That poets and visual artists and musicians and architects and sculptors. So it was that kind of time, where there was so much invention and this idea that things could be spontaneously arising and also be, have some quality to them rather than just acting out or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
So I worked in arts and education when I was at Naropa University, and after that with teachers and in classrooms. And a team of friends of mine also did this kind of work. So when the Shambhala Institute for Authentic Leadership was started in Halifax, Nova Scotia, 2001,
Mm-hmm.
we were invited to do this creative process module for leaders and change makers who attended. So it was a very innovative program of both meditation, arts, creative process, arts, and change work. And at that time, I met Peter Senge, who was a big supporter of this program and who's become quite a mentor to me over the years. Meg Wheatley and others were attending that. So that was the connection, that I met Otto in 2003 by just attending his program and found it really interesting. And shortly after that, by my good fortune, he asked if I would work with him. So we did capacity building programs in which there was content which he delivered. There was a real sense of heart connection and facilitation that was offered by a woman named Beth Janderno, an extraordinary facilitator. And then I sort of did this meditation and the movement part where it got more body, like what actually does a theory feel like? Because theory is a theory, but it needs to be applied to context. And so what does letting go actually feel like? What does letting come actually feel like? So it was more my job to create practices, and many of them very closely related to what I'd already been doing, that people could experience these kinds of shifts of body, mind, knowing, and to bring more just body intelligence into work which was based upon a theory. And so that I felt like my job was to kind of get it planted in people's bodies, which really, it's been just a wonderful journey working with Otto, with the Presencing Institute colleagues. It's really been a fantastic journey. A lot of skepticism in the beginning by people, like,
oh, I can imagine. It's such a different angle that people come from when they finally end up with their EU, and then usually that's not an embodied route. Usually that's very on the thinking and the mind and the reflecting, and so yeah. So that's how your journey started on this particular branch of your experience. And so, when did you start calling it social presencing theater? When was the embodiment, the onset of SPT?
So Otto wrote a book, the first book, the big fat Theory U book. I don't know when that was, 2004, 5, 6, I don't know, somewhere around. And he wrote in the book about social presencing theater.
Oh.
He used the words, it's in the book. And there's a description of what it was. So I didn't know what he was talking about. It turned out that neither did he really, because so I was offering some of the practices that I do, which had been called the art of making a true move. That would have been the how I had called my work and my workshops.
The art of making a true move.
That's right.
All right.
And so I didn't really know what it was exactly, but we tried things out, which we thought were social presencing theater, which had to do with interviewing people and using their words and making a kind of performance theater, which would trigger like a World Cafe conversation with the community. So one of these we made for the in New York City with a small nonprofit that helped people with developmental disabilities find work, and when they had sort of completed, young adults when they'd completed the kind of high school age. And so we made a little theater performance with these young people and their support workers in New York, and that triggered. So then the invitation was to first New York City agencies that worked with this population, and then to statewide, and the performance would trigger a conversation that was then held by the group. And so that was what we thought it was. And really, it wasn't until some time later that Otto said, I've been thinking about this social presencing theater. He said something like to me, do you think you could make that? And I said, you know what it is? Well, not exactly. Like he has a vision of something or an idea, but it doesn't, it isn't anything yet, but he can tell how important this is in terms of highlighting and making visible a change in a system, a field shift in a system. So that's been that's how the name was not mine. And the work, since I've met him and the other colleagues, the work is not really mine. It's very co-created. It's very much like, oh, that doesn't work. Well, why don't we try this? Let's try that. Oh, this seems, it's very, very living. It's not fixed. We sort of say, well, we have 8 practices, but there's an enormous range of how people use them now and what direction they go in. And so it's definitely not my work. I just try to shepherd along and try to do a little bit of capacity building for people. It's social presencing, right? The presencing is the name of the work that means awareness-based change, right? Awareness-based and social. And the word theater, Jennifer, is actually, we're using the root of that word, which means place where something significant becomes visible.
Okay.
That's what that word means. Its root is a place. The root is the same as theory. It makes something more clear, makes it more visible. So using that word theory in it, the theater in its very root meaning, which is, something is made, a place where something significant is made visible. And as long as there have been people, there's been theater where people enact. I mean, I'm not an anthropologist or a sociologist, but this sense that people could enact what it is to be a human with other humans, and that witnessed by the whole community. So it's in that spirit that we offer the work.
Wow, that's one of the most beautiful stories I've ever heard in this summit. And a couple of things pop up for me as you are sharing this journey. And that is when you say the words showed up in a book that Otto Scharmer wrote, and they didn't necessarily have meaning yet in the tangible, very explicit sense that we give meaning to words and things and phenomenon and people. But as you're explaining it, I get a sense of it, that a type of feeling that you can only get when you grasp the essence of something and you don't have words for it yet. But it's almost as if the way you communicated and co-created it was through the art of making true movement, and through making visible, and through catching other words, and making the catching of the words and the meaning making as part of the process of what the social presencing actually does, and that is to make visible what's not visible. And I never thought of the core or root of theater in theory being uh, combined like that, or um, joined in an explanation like you gave. And so root is another core element for me in your explanation of what is the foundation of things, what is the essence of things, um, and because through that essence is where the connection between people actually takes place. And it's not language helps, but it's not language that came first. So as you're sharing it, I get the sense of a very deep collaboration and deep connection that you have when you create something like this.
Mm.
And so, speaking of the root and the essence, before we go into how social presencing theater then works on a more practical level, um, what for you are sort of the core underpinnings of it? And I think you shared some, um,
Mm.
but would you mind making those more explicit? What are some underpinnings of SPT?
One of the um, one of the things that what you were saying reminded me that the theory you work or presencing is about um, it's about attending to what the language is called the emerging future,
Mm-hmm.
that we could attend to this present moment in such a way that we experience something about to happen, and that you could call that innovation or creativity, but it's an acknowledgement that freshness or something um, that maybe wasn't just a rehashed version of something that we've been doing.
Yeah.
That's what we need on the planet now, is real innovation, is real freshness, which, as you mentioned, is connected to some sense of an essential humanity, or the word again that we use sometimes in presencing work is called the source. It's open enough to
Mm-hmm.
mean anything to anybody. But it is that sense of the essence, or the most open possibility, the
Yeah.
most open sense of the spacious, not constricted by what we think and by history and by past oppressions and past prejudices and past just conceptual overlay, assumptions, opinions. So that one of the essential ingredients, let's say, would be this ability to suspend what we think should happen, could happen, might happen, are afraid would happen, to be able to
Mm-hmm.
suspend that enough to just experience this present moment, which sometimes
Mm-hmm.
in my tradition is called nowness. Nowness.
Mm-hmm.
Not worry that we don't know what will come next. So it's a training in staying with, this is what I experience, with the phenomenology of that,
Yeah.
trusting that there is incredible intelligence and wisdom in just this experience, and that opening to that will lead us to the next step. So it's like taking a step as a leader. Let's say you need to do something, but then there's this waiting and attending. How does the body feel? Like, what is happening right now in the space, so that we know what the next move would be, which in a way is what we're calling a true move, and that could be done collectively. So one of the roots would be this sense of nowness.
Mm-hmm.
One of the roots would be not knowing as a kind of intelligence.
Mm-hmm.
One could be that one has to have some trust or faith in oneself and others that we will, the emerging future and the choices we make will be saner, healthier, more compassionate than what we've got now, that kind of thing. There are principles or basic, um, sort of basic knowing that says you can have faith in your body knowing, in your sensing. That's
Mm-hmm.
not everybody does. We have disconnected from that kind of knowing. So
Yeah.
I think that those principles, plus the sense that human beings are trustworthy and we can trust each other and we can open up to one another, and the central principles of theory U are open mind, open heart, open will. And so that guides us to, what does that mean? How can we open up when there's fear, or when there's a lot of discomfort, or when we don't trust this situation? And
Yeah.
how do we learn to how do we learn to really practice the fullness of being a human
Yeah.
and contacting our own real care for this world? I mean, we care for one another. We care for this world. We don't want the whole thing to just go downhill.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
so so we need these capacities now,
Mm.
right,
Yeah.
to to trust one another and to really access this open space of possibility.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I'm so with you that that this is what we need now, and at the same time that in the current context, it is so difficult to actually sit with the seemingly paradoxical movement um, of wanting to know the future and being invited to really notice the here and now, and to be invited to trust people,
Mhm.
whereas there's so much of the opposite going on.
That's right. Yeah.
And there's actually many more that I could add to those, that are just really, if you don't look closely, or if you don't actually make the movement or try to make the movement, they seem like a paradox to do.
Mm.
And so, for many people who are into the work of Theory U, and uh, uh, looking at and reflecting upon their situations and their context they live in and the roles they fulfill and the issues they encounter, if they're already open to that, then it's easier to take on the invitation. And so, what is it like to work with people, for example, leaders? You mentioned leaders um, who have yet to take maybe a couple of hurdles before they actually can get to that place of taking on this invitation.
Mhm.
So, how do you introduce SVT to new people, or people who are not inclined to stop in the daily rush that we have of daily business and daily life?
It's it's a funny thing, Jennifer. It, like, I get way less pushback than you would think.
Okay, all right.
And having done this for 15 years now, more or less, it's so much easier now than it was when we started.
Mm-hmm.
Without the kind of champions of having Peter Senge and Otto and others that say, "This is what we're doing here. This is we think this will be helpful." Um, I couldn't have probably done much of anything. So one thing is that one needs champions, people that actually are credible within the context that they're appearing, and that really believe that um, this is an effective way to get to a genuine, um, um, understanding, and then effective way of moving forward.
Yeah.
So I just last couple of days worked with a whole bunch of bankers, and in fact, for some reason, I've had two opportunities to work with bankers in the last month,
Yeah.
and this didn't strike me as the most willing of and open-minded of audiences. That was my downloading,
Hmm.
and yet people want to do the right thing. They want to help out in their organizations. They want to have better relationships with each other.
Yeah.
They want to tap into their best qualities. So, they will sit still and do a little meditation. They will get on the floor and do a 20-minute dance. I mean, and partially it's because others before me have tilled that soil. So
Yeah.
they're already have had uh, some work, and in this case with the bankers, wonderful work with consultants from Presidency Institute. So they already are on board with the concepts and with the potential. And then the kind of meditation and the movement part is a in the background until that people seem to be at a certain level of openness, and then I'm often invited in then.
Yeah.
The other thing is basically scaffolding. Like I worked in Los Angeles in high schools in South Central Los Angeles with kids and teachers, and um, I learned this term called scaffolding, which is in education, how to teach reading or something like that,
Yeah.
and um, how to start in a small way. How to put two kids together and say, now make a shape with your body. One of you make a shape, and then the other one you say, now what do you notice about that? What is it? What could you tell me about that shape?
Yeah.
And then they change and they have partners. So it's starting simple with things
Right.
that people already are familiar with.
Hmm.
One of my colleagues worked with policemen in London, and it turned out that he opened the conversation about what was important to them, and they talked about how they had gut feeling. They needed to had developed like what they called gut feeling. So
Yeah.
then my colleague says, yes, that's what social presencing theater can help you with. Is this, they use that language and that frame of reference for what was important to people. And
Yeah.
everybody has experiences when you say in the classroom or in your office, where did you notice that if you kind of let go of your ideas and settled more into the space and into your body, that good things shifted, and something shifted and good things happen. Everybody has a story like that. So you just
Yeah.
hook into where people are and what's important to them. And
Mm.
then there's a little pathway that leads to their natural embodiment and natural sense of space and their natural care for one another. So
Yeah.
then
Yeah.
less of a struggle than you would think than I
Yeah.
thought, actually.
Yeah. Well, actually, what I hear you say also is, um, and these are words that I put to it, is that there's a way to enter their system of space and spatial awareness, both in their bodies and around them. So it seems like you have a very gentle way of entering their systems and their worlds, and helping them articulate that, so that there's a space to start small, and that there's a space to start where they are,
Yeah.
um, and to then take the social presencing from there.
Yeah.
And so how does it work if one wants to practice? Is it something you practice, or is it something that that uh, um, that you learn when you go through a social presencing theater experience? So how does that work?
So most of my work, Jennifer, is in training people, is in capacity building. I'm
Mm-hmm.
not a consultant, as we found out here. I'm a data teacher, basically, and so I often accompany a a consultant who thinks that this might be something that would be beneficial for the group, like a 4D mapping or stuck, and that they themselves don't feel that they are confident, or for other reasons don't feel that they want to be the facilitator for that.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, so of course we have multiple courses there. I think we have now trained a couple of maybe 20 other teachers. Some of them are very experienced consultants who also offer workshops for people that would be interested in learning this methodology. So there is a training track of people who are very interested in this and want to bring it into their own organizations, schools, or their consultants or coaches that would like to integrate this into um, their their practices. They are
Mm.
practices, and they're and the main thing is that there are personal things that we are asking people to do, little simple things that would just help them on a daily basis be more embodied. And then
Mm-hmm.
our main kind of vehicle is called practice groups. So in various locations, in Vienna, in Berlin, in New York, but there are practice groups where a person can come and practice on some kind of regular basis. Or in my case, a person will call up and say, I am having a stuck. I have a situation that's stuck. Can I get 5 or 6 people to come and do the stuck practice to see if we can get some insight and movement here? Things like that.
Mm.
So
Yeah.
they are practices. And I wanted to back up just to say that there isn't any, it's not a problem solution method, and
Mm-hmm.
there isn't any right way of, um, you're not trying to get a specific outcome. And it's just the moment to moment unfolding of the experience with others that could shift. And it's a reflection method.
Yeah.
So we frame out now what is it that we're investigating, or what the frame is. And in a context, you would have to say which practice would you use in this particular client need.
Mm-hmm.
Then it's an activity that somebody sets it up, and there's a beginning, middle, and end. There's an activity. There's no intervention in the activity. In other words, the facilitator does never steps in and says, do this or do that, or it should be like that, or anything like that. There's no intervention. Once you set it up, whatever happens, happens.
Mm-hmm.
And that could be a few minutes, or it could be much longer, depending on the practice. Then there's a reflection period, which is very, again, about data. Like, I
Yeah.
saw this, I felt this, I did this. No
Yeah.
interpretation. You're
Mm-hmm.
suspending what you think the meaning is as long as possible.
Yeah.
Then there's a more generative conversation about what happened. And then
Mm-hmm.
at the very end, how does this apply to our organizational context, or to the situation that I'm investigating? So
Yeah.
the 4-step kind of approach to really lighten up on the expectation of, how is this useful, and to
Yeah.
try to get people to really pay attention in a very refined way, in a certain way. We're asking them to
Mm.
tend to what is their experience, and being as honest about that as we can. So it's a kind of,
Yeah.
it's offered as a reflection tool and as an innovation tool, that
Right.
things could come up that then could be prototyped.
Yeah.
It's we,
Wow.
it's definitely not a, um, there's nobody that will say, oh, this is going to be the solution to your problem if you do this.
No. 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 So it's so and um Thank you for the explanation. Um, so actually, it's a process that, and there's some guidance to the process, but there's no. It's not, the process is not directed in the sense that make this movement or do this thing. It's more there's a systems entry in the sense of somebody has a question or a case or a situation, or they feel stuck, as you said. And then there's a possibility to use the social presencing theater through um, working with one or more practices. And they have these 4 steps in them where as soon as the people start with embodiment experience, and in which they may or may not move, but where they have more access to the body intelligence,
That's right.
where in the reflective phase there is the data from what comes out of the intelligence, and then much later it's then contextualized back into the context of where the stuckness or where the question or where the thing started off with.
That's
But
right.
interpretation is left to the very last, if at all, to allow for its fullness to come out in terms of um, possibility or
Yeah, as soon as there's interpretation, it'll shut the process down.
yeah,
We want,
yeah.
or is if the other thing that will really shut the process down is projection. If I
Mm-hmm.
what I think you're experiencing. So
Yeah.
there are definitely guidelines around just good, clean speech around that one only speaks from one's own first person experience and
Mm.
projects onto what you think someone else is experiencing, because that really will create such a lack of safety.
Yeah.
There's
Yeah.
it's a setup, like just if I were to take one practice, if you for instance had a situation in which you felt stuck, it's like, what does that actually feel like? So it's not like psychodrama or anything like that. It's not psychologically based. It's
Mm-hmm.
more like what does that feel like? You're being pressed down, or does it feel like you're being held back, or does it feel like you can't see where you're going? Like, then you could set up a little sculpture with the others. You say, oh, it's kind of like you lean into the stuck place, or you
Mm-hmm.
lean in towards uh rather than trying to get rid of it. You
Yeah.
say, there's real wisdom there. If I could just stay with something, it will naturally move. Nothing is stuck. It's stuck is not a sustainable position. There's
Mm-hmm.
nothing in nature that's sustainable in this. So a system stuck is not sustainable,
No.
right? It has to move in one
Yeah.
way or another. And also, nobody is stuck by themselves in systems thinking, right? It's you're in a, whether it's a family system or a team or an organization, it's a co-created stuck.
Yeah.
And unless everybody moves, it doesn't matter that one person has an insight and moves ahead if the whole rest of it isn't functioning. So how do
Mm-hmm.
we think as a system? Even if it's 4 or 5 people, they make a sculpture, which means they just, they stand closer, they stand far, they look here, they look there, they try to embody in a little physical sculpture what the person's story is, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And sometimes that's quite literal, like in a 4D map. If it's a school system, it could be, this one is the student, and this one is the teacher, and this one is the dropout, and this one is the parent. I mean, it could be literal, but it also can be just more a sense of the forces. And then if you stop thinking about it and really feel, what is this little social body, this social sculpture of 5, 8 people, however many, what does it feel like, or 2 for that matter? And then you say, what does it want to do? Not what
Ah,
do I want to do, or not
what the
what
sculpture wants to do.
exactly. What is the system, the
Yeah.
sculpture, the
Yeah.
social body? What does it actually want to do? Now get out of the way and just listen and feel into, where your part of this could contribute to moving forward. So
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
a shift in the mind from, of course, just my stakeholder position or my
Mm-hmm.
agenda to trying to think from and be and experience oneself as part of a team, as part of a little social body, and that the social body itself would like to move towards a healthier situation.
Yeah.
Again, towards sustainability.
Yeah.
Um, it's that's the basic mechanism, and we call that from sculpture 1 to sculpture 2. Like, what is sculpture 1's current situation?
Mm-hmm.
And sculpture 2 is just what does it want to move toward?
Mm-hmm.
Quite frankly, sometimes the sculpture ones move towards a more stuck. There's deeper levels of stuck than
Stuckness.
than the client is presenting, right? And that shows up then. And
Yeah.
so that's what I mean. Like, you can't, for us, getting a deeper level of stuck is a way is a moving forward. It's not a problem.
Mm. Mm. So, if I understand correctly, and I love the example of stuckness because that's something that most, if not all of us, can relate to, is that actually when you're experiencing something like stuckness, it always happens in a social body. It's not just you, and it's a social body that's contextualized. It's moving in a context, and so with social presencing theater, the invitation is the through the body and through the movement to tap into the bigger body, the social body, the system, and to see where it wants to move, and how that movement from sculpture 1 to 2, how that where the social body ends up, or where it is in that sculpture 2, and that can then inform us in terms of not just how the social body is doing, but also what possibilities are to work with where it's moving to.
That's
And you say in some cases that can be something emerging and something innovative, and in some cases it can lead to more stuckness. Um, but if you're in that space where you don't judge stuckness, then you may even have a sense of why that stuckness is there,
yeah,
or what the role and function is of the stuckness
yeah,
in the context that it's in. Because sometimes um, uh, stuckness appears for a reason or has a function. Um, and that's something that we cannot make up with our rational minds, or from the individual standpoint or position that we have. And so this can give us access uh, to a more embodied input and intelligence.
yeah, yeah,
Wow, wow. And so you mentioned 4D mapping a couple of
yeah.
times. What is that?
Um, so it's also a practice,
Mm-hmm.
and one that is probably more connected to larger systems.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Okay.
and it's still a sculpture 1 to sculpture 2. And as you said, that was so important, is that stuck is not a problem. It's part of a creative process. There
Mm-hmm.
isn't anything, that innovation and creativity, it naturally has obstacles. It's not, in fact, I'm quite a fan of obstacles in terms of real learning, right? So obstacles are how we learn, and how, I always think flow is overrated myself, because I've learned so much from interruptions and from obstacles. So um, you know, I'm I can really appreciate that stuck is not a problem, and that it's a natural process that,
Yeah.
as you pointed out, has intelligence and insight and enormous potential. So we don't want to throw that out. It's like you know, in making good soil, you have to plow back the dead leaves and the kind of weeds and stuff into the ground to make good soil or something like that. So the 4D map is a systems map. It is something that grew out for us of when we were in Boston and at the time of Occupy Wall Street,
Mm-hmm.
and we were setting up these maps of the different stakeholders in the Occupy Wall Street movement.
Mm-hmm.
It was a combination of a kind of meditative background of movement, of course, um, and also of it's the closest one probably to constellations,
Yeah.
organizational constellations, and system constellation. Although it's not, it doesn't come from the same background, and it probably has a different paradigm in general, as well as the methodology is different. And uh, although there are, of course, many different approaches to constellation work,
Mm-hmm.
um, but it's similar in that there are a stakeholder, that each person embodies a stakeholder role.
Yeah.
So as I said, if we were to take the school system, and so people bring a case that's more oftentimes a social case
Yeah.
around immigration, around but not always. Like you could bring an organizational case, a company case, that something is going on in this particular company, and then there's usually someone that offers the case, and then there's a facilitator that will call out the names of the roles. The roles have been determined by the case giver
Yeah.
of who that person feels are the stakeholders. And in every 4D map, we include these three voices of what's called the three divides. So the ecological disconnect, people from nature;
Mm-hmm.
social disconnect, just obscene wealth inequality and social inequality;
Mm-hmm.
um, and the what's what Otto calls the spiritual divide, which is a person's disconnection from themselves, from their true
Mm.
nature, which causes burnout, depression, anxiety disorder, suicide. That kind of, like, that's in evidence, right? That the statistics on this kind of unhappiness on the planet is growing and growing and growing, particularly with young people. So
Mm. So the
there,
ecological, the social, and the spiritual uh, disconnect or divide, the those are called in as roles, or are they called in as
no,
okay?
they have roles because they're
Ah, okay.
stakeholders, right? The earth is a stakeholder in every choice that we make. The earth is
Mm.
it's going to we affect the ecological, we affect the climate, right? By everything we buy, everything we eat, every time we get on an airplane, right? These are choices that we make. The earth is always a stakeholder in the map. So somebody embodies the earth.
Yeah.
The the Those that are excluded or marginalized are always excluded, are always included in the map. So
Right.
some who stands for that person, the voice of that person, no matter what it is, like it could be within a system, like in education, maybe the excluded is the young person who has been thrown out of school, the dropout, the person that can't connect. It could,
Mm-hmm.
or it could be a more general sense that so many people on this planet cannot engage in learning, in they don't have uh, food and water and all of this. So that person and those groups of people is in every map, no matter whether that's a corporate map, a social map, a school map. That person is always there.
Mm-hmm.
Then the third one is what is called the higher future self, or the highest aspiration. That the whatever the highest human sense of you or me or a system, that's always included in the map. So we never lose that sense that there is in every system this healthiness, right? So that's, and this aspiration. So that's in the map. But the earth and the higher future self, or the aspiration, are the only non-humans in the map. Everything else is a human being or a group of human beings. So it's the EU, or it's this particular constituency, or it's
Mm-hmm.
children, or sometimes the um, sometimes the highest future self is called the unborn, because the unborn are stakeholders. What happens in the next generation and
Yeah.
the next generation, those are stakeholders. So oftentimes one of those, that person is the unborn that's holding the.
Mm. Yeah.
So then
Yeah.
we set up the map. Now, the person with this case does not set it up. They tell you the case, but each of the stakeholders, they find their own place where they
Mm-hmm.
balance themselves in the system.
Yeah.
And after they get themselves settled, that's their sculpture one, right?
Yeah.
And then they have a short amount of time, 4 minutes, to move collectively by this sensing, feeling, presencing method to a sculpture two. They
Mm.
also say something. They can say one sentence from their sculpture one, and they say one sentence from the sculpture two.
And they
And
say it out loud in the space?
they say it out loud. They find
Ah.
the space. They don't stand. They find a shape. They can be flat on the floor. They can be at a sitting level. They can be at a standing level, and it has to do with spatial hierarchy, like where they are in the system. They
Mm-hmm.
can be in the center. They can be at the edges, periphery. They can be facing in. They can be facing out. They can be facing to certain ones and not to others. Like what's in your what's in your actual sight line. So they make in movement, those are your main ways, ingredients of communicating, is level, proximity, close or far, and direction. Those three things are the ingredients of movement. Right?
Yeah.
So using that and their sense of where is it that they belong,
Mm-hmm.
they move to sculpture two. Then they say their one sentence again, each one individually says
Mm-hmm.
their goal and their sentence. And then there's one sentence from the citizens, the ones that are watching. We call them the citizens.
Yeah.
Each,
So they also have a role then.
oh, of course, yeah, they have a
Very
role
active
too.
role.
They have
Yeah.
a role, and they can see it from a different angle. Like one person sees it from this side, person sees it from this side. So their perspective on the whole is different, just
Yeah.
because of where they're placed, right? So you need to get the voices of everything in the system, those that are holding the space and those that are the players.
Mm-hmm.
And then once everybody has gotten in with a kind of I saw, I did, I felt, something like that. So people might say, when I saw those two connect, I felt I felt sad. When I saw that one turn away, I felt curious. It surprised me that this happened. That's
Mm-hmm.
the kind of kind of language
Yeah.
that we're trying to encourage, that people actually speak from themselves, and they increase their ability to observe what happened and to notice both what they see, right, what's made visible, and also the feeling quality underneath that.
Yeah. So that's like generating the data.
That's right. We generate the data. Then it gets more and more open, and then in terms of the conversation. But people can only say one thing that they notice at a time. They can't
Mm-hmm.
go on and on. But then there's different ways that both the players and the citizens have a little bit of a conversation, and then we turn it back to the case giver, which
Mm-hmm.
And then there are things like, what did you see that confirmed what you already knew? It was confirming. Like you say, oh, that was so much like they're doing it.
Yeah.
That was disconfirming, that was a surprise, that made you say, no, they never do that. No, that isn't what I think. Like, this is so important. What surprises you, what's disconfirming, what is not what you already know and think. In fact, what you don't even agree with. This is so important to see that, right, in the map. And then where, what touched you.
Mm-hmm.
So this is very important that we notice, like what we're noticing, let's say, Jennifer, is how much sadness there is
Mm-hmm.
at what's going on in the world, in all systems, whether it's a big or whether it's homelessness, right? And that's an important ingredient in our work, to tell you the truth, is that sadness is like a code word for compassion for us.
Mm-hmm.
Means that you care. You care about what happens. You care about these people. You care that this isn't working. And there's a underlying kind of heartbrokenness about this, which is an incredibly strong motive force for change.
Mm-hmm.
We're seeing that this sadness is what actually gets people, this care gets people, it's not just anger that gets people to change or despair. It's this kind of heartbrokenness, of a kind of human heartedness, that we know we could be doing better. We know we could make better choices. We know we could let our defenses down a little bit and try to function from the whole. So that feeling quality, not as, again, as a psychological issue, but this underlying kind of tender-heartedness is oftentimes in the map and kind of comes forth. And then the last thing is, where do you see potential?
Yeah.
Like, I noticed that this one went and stood next to that. Now, maybe I could tomorrow send an email and set up a call with those two. I never thought that they would be interested in anything.
Yeah.
So we want to find 3 or 4 potential prototypes that the person can at least go ahead and have a conversation or think about that or rearrange something. So that's a 4D map. And then there's a little ceremony at the end to appreciate the person who was vulnerable and brought their case
into the space. Yeah.
So there's a little appreciation, and then there's a stepping out of role so that you don't.
And shaking it off. That's how I always call it.
kind of bowing out of that and leaving our role behind. And so so that's, you can see that there's similarities, but also there's no intervention whatsoever. Once the facilitator just gets them in their roles, and they're actually wearing their role. It's on a sheet like this. Yeah, a piece of card, so that they have a little bit of conceptual information, like that they can remember. And then but then after it gets set up, there's no intervention at all.
No.
And there's this little space holding. So, we've got like 16-year-old kids doing this. You don't need to be trained as being particularly, you don't have to have an opinion whatsoever about what's going on. All you have no opinion, and to hold the space and to be the timer. And so my goal here is that any person on the planet could do this without much. And so we're getting amazing results with this, and I cannot tell you.
Well, it's there's many things, like you said in the beginning, before you started explaining 4D mapping, is there's many similarities with constellation work, but also some other systemic approaches that I know of, that specifically when they work with the space. And what I find so particularly fascinating about the 4D mapping, as you just shared with us, is that actually I was going to ask you next, does it make a difference if you work with issues or stuckness or a case that is in the organizational realm or in the societal realm. But because you have all these, what I call big roles, like the ecological or earth and the future generations or potential or the higher self, or these really big roles, and where the earth is always a stakeholder. Actually, the bigger context, maybe even much bigger than society, um, is also in the space.
Yeah.
And so with the sculptures, it doesn't actually really matter at what systemic level you bring in the case, because there's always the bigger forces around it that are also roles in the sculptures. And that is something that is different than, for example, a constellation, where it's very important um, for example, if you work in an organization and you facilitate an organizational constellation, it's good to be aware of the societal forces that are at play in organizational issues. And that's not necessarily the layer where you're looking for the movement, even though it has a huge impact on possibilities, potential, and also stuckness of organizations, simply because they're smaller than society in their surrounding context of industry and what's happening out there. Um, so that's something that I see as different. And also what you mentioned about intervention, whether you intervene or not intervene, is also different in the different, at least embodied systemic approaches that I am aware of. So thank you for giving this description, this uh, yeah, explanation of what 4D mapping as one of the practices in SBT. And time is really flying as we're having this conversation, and we need to close off soon. There's so many other things I would love to ask you. Um, um, but I just wanted to say, and this is something that I often do, and that is, um, um, how did uh, your dance and your meditation, your work with SPT in the Presencing Institute, how did that uh, create true movement for you in your life?
Ah, well, I think for one thing, I've just learned a huge amount um, about a certain kind of um, process and language around a process. Like, for instance, I never do a meeting um, or really anything now without this sensing, then presencing, then realizing. Like it's become, and I think many of us who are familiar with the theory, it just becomes how you do things. You start by
Mm.
listening. The whole area of listening was so informative for me. I turned out to be a terrible listener, and like it's very detailed. That there's a way of actually monitoring how you listen and pay attention, and this was incredibly helpful. And even it's kind of a joke, like, well, that's a kind of factual way of listening without any feeling. You can actually determine how we listen, and then just bringing in space. I just realized I was on a coaching call yesterday with a group, my own coaching group. I mean, that's been great that we have our own coaching groups. You can set up a coaching peer coaching group, um, and uh, and just realizing that our whole method of how you reflect back with images, with feelings, with gestures. I mean, gestures are part of our culture now. A person just gets up and makes a shake, in the middle of a conversation. So that how what I've learned just in this community and how it's affected my life has been profound, and enriched what is possible in terms of social art. It's inspiring. I think we're just touching the surface on some level of what's possible. Um, the Both the theory, the community, the work itself, I think it's also energizing. I mean, I'm old, Jennifer. I'm like 75 and I'm still working full time. And I get so much life, feel so much life from practitioners and from the work itself and the community itself. So I think that, um, as I said earlier, it's just been an incredible blessing in my life to be able to feel that this work could be um, brought into communities that aren't necessarily arts oriented or meditation oriented, but a way of, a way of contributing some small way to, to the planet these days, which is naturally very challenging for all of us.
Mhm.
I have grandchildren, and I don't know what kind of world they're going to live in, and we all, I mean, your program and your work is the same. It's trying to bring light to positive change in the world. So I really appreciate that the invitation, of course, personally, but just appreciate that you're doing this and using your own life in such a positive way. Really appreciate that.
Mm. Thank you so much, Arawana. And I think that uh, that our conversation can be an invitation for everyone who's watching to to tap into their own body, their own sense of spatial or embodied intelligence, um, to contribute to. That's what I get to when I look back on our conversation, to contribute to what makes us human and what can create an uplifting or an enlightening of humanity. So when we zoom out, it really feels like that's what we're actually that's what we've been talking about. So thank you so much for being in conversation with me, Arawana.
Thank you. It's really been a privilege, and I appreciate so much.
Thank you. And to everyone who's watching, there's the invitation. And in our community space, we have a space for further communication. But also, if you want to share something about movement or about anything else around social presenting theater, as we discussed that today, then please share. We're open to seeing you there online. Thank you so much for watching. See you next session. Bye-bye.